Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today. Now this is something that I wanted to do for a while, more just for my sake, but I also wanted to share it to the community as well, because the work I do, I want to make sure you guys are just informed as I am. So what I've done is gone ahead and test every single supercharge that does damage, besides some few exceptions we'll get into. So I've tested every single supercharge on single target, and I will plan to do the same thing on AoE and kind of bring you the results here. So how I set this up, my might here is just under, just over 117k might base damage. So basically what I want to say here, or what I'm trying to point out, is that this is basically not just necessarily establish a baseline damage, because baseline damage I would have to have like no crit spec. I would have to just not use the transformation card, because that's all going to impact it, and that's not really realistic. Everyone's going to have league buffs, which is going to impact their criticals and the damage and everything. Most people are going to run transformation card, or a large majority will. So I mean, that's not really realistic. So this is basically exactly how you'd use a supercharge in a raid or an alert, just without, like, say, buffs. Like, I'm not going to use a supply drop or a buff trinket, or I don't have the escalating might neck. So basically my stats don't change. My stats are always going to be these ones here in terms of the percentages and in terms of the might. So basically it lets me establish a baseline then. In terms of artifacts, I'm using transformation card, soul amplifier, and philosopher's stone, basically just to increase your might a bit. Combat rating was 360. Now the only other thing as well, each supercharge was tested 10 times on the House of Legends sparring target. So it's not in like my layer, it's not in the league hall. Now, there are some supercharges with the cast bar animations, which I'll touch on later, that'll be impacted by that recent change we had, where if you didn't see that video, basically, if you get interrupted on it, you lose your supercharge. So, like, if you have to cancel a big gun, you lose all your supercharge. So basically, here's just a list of all the supercharges we tested here. Now, the ones I'll touch on that I didn't test are the ones, a lot of them are like mainly buff ones. Like, you can't test wolf form damage or ice elemental or gorilla form, because of they don't have any damage themselves. It's just that they change how you deal damage. So yeah, ice elemental gives a huge damage buff, but it's all going to depend on your rotation. Same thing for testing like Neovenom or Berserk or Circuit Breaker. We all know how good those supercharges are, but it's entirely dependent on the actual rotation that you use or the situation. You could use a Berserk or a Neovenom boost and have to block or get interrupted or stunned or whatever, and you lose all that damage. It's entirely dependent on how good, or you're just using a bad rotation. If you're using a bad rotation for Berserk or Circuit Breaker, it's not going to be better than some of the other ones, because it's all about maximizing your rotation and then having the damage buff. Other things, the Rampage, critical buff, Battle Drone and Mass Hysteria, basically a little tiny pet damage. Same thing with Grand Summoning. The reason why I didn't test these is that, for one, it's not actually, it doesn't work with Log Analyzer, because it's not actually me doing the damage as a character. It's the Fury doing it, or Battle Drone. So it's harder to list. And also that you're not going to be using Battle Drone and Mass Hysteria just for the pet damage. And Grand Summoning, while you would, it's a little bit awkward, because in terms of like buffing like a Spy Drop or a Soder or anything, it does nothing buffs Grand Summoning, except for the Source Shard Godwave proc, which is Grand Summoning is a 30-second supercharge in terms of the duration. All these usually are like within 1 or 2 seconds, you'll have all the damage, where Grand Summon takes 30 seconds to complete its damage. So even Godwave proc is only going to proc at the beginning, or maybe like once or twice other. So these are the ones I didn't test, basically. So we're going to move into each one individually, then I'll show you the results, and then we'll kind of go into a little bit of a deep dive as well. So with movement mode ones, or basically the 2500s, as you can see here, the numbers basically are 10 pulses, so speed drain it just basically ticks off each time. So you can kind of gather from here, Dust Off Gale, Devastating Flip Backing Bubble, really all the same. So don't take, basically the numbers here are the total damage over 10 pulses. So while that doesn't give like a 100% indicator of which ones are best, it essentially does, because it totals them up. It doesn't give an average one or basically gives a total. But you can still see it. So Clown Box, throughout the hits, the max hit's 244. So even when it crits one of the hits, then it's already one of the highest ones. But averages out about 30k, so that's why there's so many more hits. And in terms, you can see the crit percentages too as well. So say for Dust Off and Gale, we get an average one, because Devastating Flip, we did 10 of them. Not each one's going to crit. Baseline damage was about 83. Max crit damage was like 210, but averaged out about 134. So that's why it's all similar there. But Clown Box, like for Clown Box is a 5,000 supercharge as well, compared to the other ones, which are 2,500. Jumping over the 5,000s, we have Freeze Ray being the highest. Now, another thing to mention, kind of an asterisk besides these ones. So Ballistic Assault, Mangle, and Freeze Ray are all cast bar animations. So that means that you are locked in those animations the entire time. And Mangle is a just dead melee supercharge anyway. So that's why, yes, they are strong, but at the same time, you have to factor in. So if I go to Freeze Rays here, is it going to show me Freeze Ray? No, I'll have to show it when I want to do the deep dive. But essentially, Freeze Ray takes about, what was it? Can't remember off the top of my head. Ballistic Assault, I think, was like 12 seconds. I'm just trying to do this as an example. So basically, if Ballistic Assault takes 12 seconds to complete its animation and that damage, yes, you get that high damage, but that's 12 seconds that you couldn't do anything else in your rotation. So it's not one of those like supercharges where you just kind of pop and forget and go back into your rotation. So really, while these supercharges are really high damage on a single target, you're actually losing out on a ton of extra damage because you're locked in the animation the whole time. So that's 8 to 10 seconds that you can't use your regular rotation. You can't go back into your heat vision and everything else because you're stuck in those supercharges. So that's why really it's not that high. That's why it entombs up there. And Fireball Barrage, you have that one is more projectile based as well. So Fireball Barrage, that damage is going to be heavily dependent on where you're positioned to the boss or whatever single target you're on. Mounted Turret, Polymorph, Megavolt, Blizzard, and you got the other ones. They're pretty much standard all the way around. But if we go back to Entomb, the smallest hit in Entomb was 229k, maxed out crit with 587. And then the other large ones, Deep Freeze as well. Minimum was 177, max crit was 434. Another thing as well, technically Atomic Blast, since it's a 0.5 second cooldown, you can use those kind of back to back. But still not the greatest for single target damage in terms of crits. I think the highest is like 400k. So either Atomic Blast does like 175k or it crits for like 436k, but other than that, doesn't do much. And out of those 10 parsers, I only had a 30% crit rate. Jumping over to the 10,000s, we have Earthquake, and that's the not so much an asterisk, but that's the full 10,000 Earthquake being used, because I know technically it's a 5,000 supercharge, but you need 10,000 activated. But I used all three times 3 melee attacks. Oblivion, Strafing Run, same thing. Strafing Run, you have to take into account that it's like a 20-second dot. So say, for example, you're using Eye of the Gemini, you actually get the initial hit with Strafing Run, but you can lose all that dot damage. Bolt Barrage from Mental, that's all projectile based too. So once again, it's like Fireball Barrage, depends on your positioning. Call of the Deep, I did not use the crit trick on it, so that's basically just transformation card base damage crits. Volcanic Calamity, Bunker, Radiation Burn. Big Gun, I'll touch this here on the kind of deep dive, and Meteor Shower there. So results wise, so technically, if we want to be specific here, without kind of factoring in supply drops or buffs or any kind of crit tricks or anything like that, or boosted damage, Earthquake is actually the strongest on single target, followed by Oblivion, Strafing Range, range. Okay, Bolt Barrage from Mental, Call of the Deep from Water. But the same thing, Call of Deep, you can technically make Call of Deep crit every single time. If Call of Deep crit every single time, then you'd see it it's actually going to be higher, which I'll touch on in the results here in a moment. So you can kind of see where everything kind of falls in line there. So a lot of the 5,000 is very similar. Same thing, Cursed Idol, I should mention that as well. You don't have any explosion damage from Cursed Idol, so that Cursed Idol obviously has more potential as well. And we have all the results here. Now the actual log, which allows me more into a deep dive here. It's the same thing. This is basically just a repeat of the log, but if we go to top hits here, what I was talking about, Call of the Deep. So Call of the Deep was going to crit every single time. At that stage, I'm still getting anywhere between 860 to 922,000 base damage just as those criticals. So that's why I call it even big gun as well. So you saw how low, so if I go back to combat breakdown, big gun's fairly down low on that list in terms of the single target ones, where we know big gun to be, strictly a single target supercharge. Not strictly, but better as a single target supercharge now. But a big gun's one of those things where it either crits or it doesn't. So if we go back to combat breakdown here and go back down to big gun. So if it doesn't crit, it's like 290k, but if it crits, it's 721 with these stats. So it's one of those things where it's really hit or miss. So it's one of those supercharges that you definitely want it to hit, and you can do significant damage. But then in terms of if we go to the log here, and we're gonna do we'll just search earthquake here. So earthquake, how it deals its damage, if you're kind of curious, is it's not one of those, same thing. You don't lose a ton of time. You do have to be in the actual animation to use the 3. So you basically get the large hits, and then there's a few extra dot ticks. So this is it's damage wise, specifically I would use it more on AoE myself than on single target. But it's one of those things where you can get multiple crits out of it. But you also have to stay in the animation the entire time. It's not as bad as, say, like a Caspar animation one, but you're still in it for, probably 12, 14 seconds in terms of the actual duration. Same thing if we go to like Oblivion here. So go back to the log. Same thing. So when Oblivion crits, it's about 200k each tick, and when it doesn't crit, it's between like 80 and 90 each time. And in terms of the hits, actually, so 50 hits, 10 parses, 5 hits each. So it's one of those ones where Oblivion could be in the millions in single target. Obviously, you'd have to have each one crit. But yeah, other than that, there's not. It's just information I wanted to share. I'm going to go into more of like a deep dive in terms of a future video as well. So basically, I'm going to look at how buffs impact supercharges. So I'll be looking at, say, for example, we'll do big gun. So I'm going to show big gun like with base damage without criticals. I'm going to show base damage like I already showed here with basically just like base stats. Then I'll show big gun with spy drop, big gun with like a critical consumable. So make sure that always crits. Big gun with like a max might buff in terms of Philosopher's Stone, the tetrahedron, sorry, forgetting my artifacts offhand, but that's what I mean. So basically I'm going to show you basically how different progression of the supercharge. So basically, okay, if you don't use the supply drop, you're missing this much damage. If you're not using a buff consumables, you're missing this much damage. So basically it'll show you how all the buffs that we have available to us, or how everything we have to increase our supercharged damage, will be reflected in terms of value. So I'll basically say if you don't use supply drop, then you're missing 20% on your supercharged damage. Or if you're not using buffs, you're missing 15%. So I'll break it down in terms of numbers like that. That's definitely going to be coming in a future video. And then I'll be testing AoE damage. Well, I know single target damage is more kind of subjective because there's not too many times where you're doing like pure single target or one target damage. Most of the time you're using like your allies for single target damage, or using just basically any supercharge because you want to essentially just proc Eye of the Gemini. You're not too worried about using like the massive single target damage. But at least there's some situations where, say like Strafing Run or Oblivion, most people think that those are more AoE generated supercharges, where Oblivion does just as well in single target. Same thing with Strafing Run. But same thing, those are 10,000 supercharges, so I know the meta is more towards focusing on using like either 2,500 or 5,000s, but you got much lower damage compared to it. So any kind of questions or concerns, put them in the comment section, and we'll see you in the next video, guys. Take care. Thanks for watching as always.